Hello, it's Andrew. Sorry, paused a minute there. Webcam's been a bit temperamental, but it seems to be working now. Today's question is, why not trust the Tories? A question to which there are so many answers. Now, here, very exciting, but here is, put close to the screen, you might be able to read it. Actually, it's weird, isn't it? It's upside down on the spine. Why Not Trust the Tories by Aneurin Bevan. Seeking a bit of political inspiration, I've recently reread this book, which I've had for many years. It's Aneurin Bevan's first book. For those who don't know, Aneurin Bevan was the Labour Party minister who set up the NHS in the post-war Labour government of 1945 to 51. And back in 1944, as the end of the Second World War approached, he wrote this book, Why Not Trust the Tories? And basically what he did is he looked at the record of the Conservative Party from the end of the First World War and through to what was the current day when he was writing, and was warning about the various deceptions that Tories might try to stay in power. These didn't work. Labour won the election in 1945 and delivered the welfare state. Now, for some reason, this book, I'll show you. It's a small hardback. There was a dust jacket. I didn't. Copy I've got hasn't got the dust jacket. It's 89 pages long. Apparently, it sold about 80,000 copies within a few months, which is pretty good going for a political book. And then just basically disappeared. It's never been reprinted, as far as I can tell. And it very rarely gets a mention. Even in biographies of Bevan, it only gets a very small mention. But I think it's one of the most one of those words I can't pronounce. One of the most perceptive political books I've ever read. I've read it several times, and I've recently, as you know, been inspired to write a blog piece about it, which I'll put a link in the description. That's what people do on these videos, isn't it? In the description below, I'll put a link to the blog piece so you can read a bit more. But basically, what we've got here, and I'll just talk through the contents of the book. There's 6 chapters, one of which looks at the position at the end of the First World War, where the Tories manoeuvred to, once the war was won, rapidly have a general election, fought on a coalition basis with the Liberals to keep themselves in power, but as the main party of the coalition. The second chapter, Betrayal of the Miners, looks at, in 1919, the government set up a public inquiry into the future of the mining industry, which was in a very sorry shape. The inquiry recommended nationalisation. The government has said before the inquiry, yes, we'll implement the recommendations. When the Tories didn't like the recommendations, they basically just promptly reneged on their pledge. Next, we've got Death by Words, which looks at the Beveridge Report during the Second World War, which was going to set up a system of social security. Again, the Tories sort of said they liked it, but they found loads of reasons to delay it. Then there's Jobs for Some, which was the Tory plan for the post-war economy, which didn't sound to Bevan much better than the plans that had brought mass unemployment in the 1930s. Then Will You Get That House, which is looking at the Tory plans for post-war house building. Again, they weren't very impressive. And the final chapter, which I think is probably the best one, is The Mechanism of the Tory Mind, where Bevan looks at the outlook of the Tory MPs. One thing he says is that... You right, my love? No. What have you done? Oh, my wife's... Have you spilt your tea? No. Oh, she spilt her tea. Okay. Bevan says that the Tories basically formed as a party and an outlook prior to democracy. They see democracy as something that gets in the way of Tory attempts to keep their power and their wealth. There's one quite interesting little phrase, which is based on a couple of pages from the end of the book. Oh, bless you, my love. Debbie's always in the background when I do these videos. She always comes up with something amusing, even whether she intends it or not. She's doing some sewing at the moment. Keeps sewing her fingers together, I think. Yeah, maybe not. Right, where was I? Yes, it says that the problem for the Tories is all the same, or is always the same. Right. The problem for him is always the same. It is how to induce the many to vote the few back into power at each election, or to put it another way, how to persuade the poor to allow the rich to continue ruling. And we've obviously got an echo of that in the Labour Party's current slogan, for the many, not the few. Now, one thing I do put, and you can read about this in the blog piece, is although the book is 75 years old now, I think it's got a lot of relevance to today. So I do draw parallels between the things that Bevan was writing about and what the current crop of Tories have been doing. I mean, I say actually that the way, I mean, he makes the point about the Tory mismanagement of the mining industry. I don't think he would have believed that with Thatcher and Major and Cameron, that basically we haven't got a mining industry anymore. They privatised it, and then just the whole thing just totally went. Housing, as mentioned, the Tories sort of modest plans for house building. There was a major house building programme at the end after the Second World War. It was overseen by Bevan, who, as well as being Minister for Health, his Minister for Health role included housing. Obviously, his major achievement was the introduction of the NHS. Now, there's a chap called Henry Willink, who gets mentioned a couple of times in this book, who was the Tory Minister for Health in the wartime coalition. Now, he was one of the Tories, and all the Tory MPs voted against the NHS when the Labour government brought in the legislation. Now, this is unbelievable, but a couple of years ago, Jeremy Hunt, when he was Secretary of State for Health, said that, I'll quote the actual words in the blog post, but basically he said, although Aneurin Bevan deserves credit for the formation of the NHS, it wasn't him or any Labour minister. It was Henry Willink who brought about a white paper in 1944. As I put, the point I make is that Hunt doesn't actually explain why, when Labour introduced a plan that was more comprehensive than what the coalition white paper said, the Tories, including Willink, voted against it. So how on earth? I mean, this is just ridiculous fake news, isn't it? There's also, as Winston Churchill looks ahead to, in a broadcast during the war, to the future, he talks about the sunny uplands. Now, yes, the sunny uplands. Now, where have we heard that one? Of course, the sunny uplands of Brexit. Yes, Brexit. I see. Now, I'll try and get this litany right. I've mentioned it to a few people over recent months. Do you remember the referendum 3 years ago? Yes. Now, what was the Brexiteers, the wonderful Brexiteer promise? What were they going to do? We were going to leave the EU. We were going to leave the single market. We were going to leave the customs union. We weren't going to pay £350 million a week to the EU. We were going to put that into the NHS. We were not going to have the European Court taking any control of our laws. We were not going to pay a divorce payment to the EU. We were going to negotiate all these wonderful free trade deals with the EU and the rest of the world, and all of it was going to be achieved within 2 years of the referendum. Well, 3 years and a bit further on, have the Brexiteers achieved any of this? No, they haven't, have they? They haven't achieved any of it. And of course, Boris Johnson and Michael Gove and various other Brexiteers who were leading lights of the Vote Leave campaign, and they told us this £350 million for the NHS. Well, that never gets mentioned by them anymore. It gets mentioned by their opponents quite a lot. When is it actually going to happen? You pledged this. Before, they could always say, oh, well, you know, we thought it was going to happen, but the government decided differently. But now they're in charge of the government. But I still don't see... I think they pledged like a couple of billion a week or two ago, and then it turned out it wasn't new money, which is recycling of old money. So, if you can get hold of a copy of this book, there are copies quite often on sale on Amazon and other similar websites at a reasonable price. It really is worth a read. It's one of the best political books I've ever read, and I hope you'll read the blog where I go into more detail about the themes I've mentioned in this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll be back another day. Thank you. Goodbye.